My name is Dan. I'm the Customer Learning and Development Consultant here at RightCapital. And in today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on optimizing equity compensation within RightCapital. So really, we're going to be looking at a couple of things today, all relating to stock plans. So for those clients that might have equity compensation in the form of stock options, it can be really valuable to be able to accurately model that out and project that within a more comprehensive retirement plan. And for those clients, that maybe aren't very well versed when it comes to exercising and liquidating those options, maybe they're not quite sure what they should be doing with those grants as they vest, being able to outline a stock plan proposal for those clients and really show them the value of exercising and liquidating options at specific times, and then integrating that into the broader context of their retirement projections, that could be really powerful. So with that being said, let's take a quick look at our agenda here. Before we dive in for today, we're going to start things off by reviewing the stock plan data entry process within the profile net worth section of a plan. So we're going to be building out a stock plan from scratch, entering the individual grants, and making sure that we're all comfortable with the process of entering that information into RightCapital. Once we've built out that stock plan, we're going to segue into an overview of the stock plan module. So this is what will allow us to view some of the more detailed information on the stock plan that we've entered, and also build out a stock plan proposal for our client. And lastly, we'll wrap things up by reviewing some key comparison visuals, directly comparing the client's current strategy to our proposed strategy, and integrating that, stock plan proposal back in the retirement analysis section into the broader context of their overall retirement plan. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over to RightCapital here. But as I'm doing that, I do want to remind everyone that these webinars are fully interactive. And I want to hear from you. So if you have any questions as we're making our way through the presentation today, feel free to write in. You should see a Q&A field within the Zoom control panel on your screen. I've got roughly 40 to 45 minutes of content prepared for you today. And afterwards, I'll be sticking around until the top of the hour to answer as many of your questions as I can. All right, so here we are in our case study for today's presentation. We've got a single client here today, Alex Russo. So let's start things off by taking a quick look at our profile, just to get us all acquainted with this client here. Alex is 58 years old, currently planning to retire at age 65, which we can see here in the goals area. And Alex is a client who has accumulated a good amount of company stock options. So if we click into the net worth section here and then take a look at the stock plan section, we can see that Alex has $222,000 worth of Google RSUs here. We can see the value of those vested and exercised shares reflected here in the client's net worth. So if we click into this stock plan here, we can take a closer look at the mechanics of this. We can see if we scroll down a bit that we've got a couple grants here. We have one large initial hire grant in 2020, followed by some annual grants in 2022, 2023, and 2024. And then you may have noticed we also have a second stock plan entered here with some NQOs in addition to the RSUs. So this is more for demonstrative purposes. I have this included here so that we can review some data entry points that are a little more specific to NQOs and ISOs that differ a bit from restricted stock units. So this is going to be valuable there. And this additional plan also includes some future grants. So we'll be able to take a look at how the stock plan module interacts with expected future grants in addition to, past grants that the client has already received. So generally speaking, that's what we're working with here for our sample clients. And for our purposes today, I have these stock plans modeled in a way that tells me that, Alex is someone who maybe isn't quite sure what she should be doing with these grants. So in this example, Alex has been receiving these RSUs and NQOs, and up until now, she's mostly just been sitting on them. And her current plan, which is the way I've set this up here, is to just keep sitting on these while she's working and then to cash out in the year that she retires, which would be 2031. And this is what we'll see reflected as the current strategy, both within the retirement projections as well as within our stock plans module. All right, so now that we're a bit more familiar with this client and their situation, I want to dedicate this next bit of time to reviewing the data entry process for stock plans here in the net worth section. And we're actually going to exclude this RSU plan from the net worth here, and we're going to build this out again from the ground up. So let me quickly exclude this here. In the process of actually entering the stock plan into the net worth section here is a pretty crucial step in ensuring that what we're looking at within the stock plans module, as well as within the financial plan as a whole, is as accurate as possible, as we're projecting that information out into the future. And as you all know, stock plans can be complicated. And if you've ever had a client send you, a multi-page PDF file with all of their stock plan details, you may know that deciphering that information is not always so straightforward. But in terms of getting that information off the page and into RightCapital, there's really a few key pieces of information that we'll need. So we'll walk through this data entry process together just to make sure that everyone's entirely comfortable with all of these inputs. Firstly, to add a new stock plan to the client's net worth here, we can click Add Account in the upper right and then choose the stock plan option here. And that's going to create a blank slate for us in terms of this stock plan entry. So we're going to start off at the top here. We'll probably want to start by naming the stock plan so we can easily identify that within our cash flows and within our stock plan module. So we'll call this Google RSUs, and then I'll put a little 2 next to it so we can differentiate that from the original. We'll also want to make sure to select the owner. So this will be more relevant within joint plans, but you can choose the client or the co-client as the owner of the stock plan here. The next step would be to specify the stock, whether that's a private stock or a publicly traded stock. So for those clients that might work for private companies, you can stick with the private stock option here, and that's going to allow you to enter the current price of that stock to the far right. So there's a little bit of manual upkeep required here in terms of keeping that current price up to date as you continue to plan for this client, but you have full flexibility to determine that current price at any point in time. For those clients like Alex here that might work for a public company, we can actually use the ticker symbol of that stock to pull in the most recent current price information. So just like entering holdings into a model portfolio or into a client's investment accounts, you can search for those holdings by ticker symbol here. RightCapital does partner with Morningstar for our holding information. So as long as the ticker symbol is in Morningstar's database, you'll also find it here in RightCapital. And we can select that stock here to pull in the most recent current price from yesterday's closing values. So that's what we're going to do here for Alex for this stock plan. In addition to the current price, we will also want to make sure to specify the stock return, how we're going to be projecting the value of that stock out into the future within the plan. So in terms of options here, you can always choose to align the growth with a specific asset class, depending on your advisor's specific return assumptions. It'll look to whatever your growth assumption is for that asset class, and it'll apply that to this stock plan and this particular stock. But of course, you can always use a flat return option as well and simply enter a customized percentage here, whatever you'd like to see. So you've got a little bit of flexibility here. For today, I am going to stick with the large growth option for Google, and we're going to work with that for our future growth. The next step here would be to specify some of the larger details for the grants within the stock plan in terms of vesting, exercise, and liquidation. So we're going to start by taking a look at vesting in terms of the vesting schedule. So in RightCapital, we do provide you with a couple of vesting schedules to get you up and running here. These 3, 4, and 5-year annual vesting schedules are built into each and every RightCapital account. But you'll notice I do have some additional vesting schedules here as well. And these are custom vesting schedules that I've built into my RightCapital account back in the advisor area. So we are going to pivot there and take a closer look in just a second here. But if you do have clients with stock plans for maybe companies like Amazon that have more of a ramp up schedule with different vesting percentages in different years and things of that nature, you have a lot of flexibility to build out whatever kind of vesting schedule you need to see for that client. So I'm going to save this as we've entered it for now, and I'm going to quickly pivot back into the advisor portal here. And within this area, the place where you can build those custom vesting schedules is within the Models tab here. So in the Models Vesting tab, this is where you can both take a look at the pre-built vesting schedules here, these 3, 4, and 5-year annual vesting schedules, but you can also add your own vesting schedules here. So if we take a quick look at something like the Amazon vesting schedule or maybe the 2-year semi-annual ramp up that I've built here, we can see that you're able to specify, the timing of the vesting schedule, whether that's annual, semi-annual. So in this case, every 6 months, or even quarterly or monthly if you need to get very granular with these schedules. And then the vesting period, which is, anywhere from 1 to 10 years, how long that vesting period is going to take place. So for something like this, a semi-annual ramp up, we can see every 6 months rather, more and more of these options are going to be vesting in increments of 10% here. So again, a lot of flexibility to create your own custom vesting schedules here. And once they're created in the advisor portal, you'll be able to use those within all of your client plans in RightCapital. So if you have any additional questions when it comes to creating custom vesting schedules, before pivoting back into our client plan for today, I do want to quickly point out this Help Center link below the Add Vesting button is going to be a great resource for you. This will provide you with an overview of how to add these custom schedules, walk you through the data entry process here, and ultimately, all the places those can be applied as well. So definitely take a look at this article if you have any additional questions here. All right, so pivoting back into our plan for Alex, we'll pop back into the profile net worth section here and reopen our stock plan in progress. So once you've chosen a vesting schedule for the stock plan, the next step here is to specify the vest at separation. Essentially, what happens to the unvested shares when the client either retires or passes away. So generally speaking, in my personal experience, the most common option here is going to be none. This option would be for those cases where the unvested shares are forfeit after the client retires or leaves that company. So, that tends to be what most companies do in my experience, and that's essentially going to ignore the unvested shares within the plan after the client retires. So, that option is here for you for those cases. But if you are working with a client who, maybe their company has a bit more of a generous, vesting provision for retirement, you can select one of these other options here. The retirement option will cause all unvested shares to automatically vest in the year of retirement. The death option is going to cause unvested shares to continue to vest on their normal vesting schedule after the client retires. And then when the client passes away, if there's any unvested shares at that point, those will automatically vest in that year. And then there is also an option for retirement/death. So this one will have those shares automatically vest, at whichever event happens first, retirement or that client passing away. So if there's any unvested shares, whichever happens first, those will automatically vest within the plan. So for this client, even though none, I believe, is what would really be the option for something like Google, I am going to stick with the death option here just so that we can take a look at some timing options in the stock plan module. So we're going to have these stock plans, or the stock grants rather, continue to exercise and, vest as they, or continue to vest according to the normal vesting schedule so that we can exercise and liquidate those at different times and take a look at some strategies there. So that's the option we're going to stick with for now. In addition to vesting, our last two fields we'll want to specify here are going to determine the exercise and liquidation strategies respectively. And the options that we choose here are going to be used as the defaults for all of the grants that we add to this stock plan. You do have the ability to customize the exercise and liquidation strategies for specific grants, which I'll show you in a few moments here once we start adding grants to the stock plan. But you can think of these exercise and liquidation strategies as sort of the big picture strategies for the stock plan as a whole. So starting with the exercise strategy, this determines essentially, when will shares exercise within the stock plan. Exercise upon vesting starting now is going to see those grants exercise as soon as they vest. Exercise upon expiry is going to see those shares exercise in the year that they would expire, which can vary, but tends to be 10 years in most cases, in my experience. This next option, start year and at vested, will wait to start exercising shares until a specific calendar year. So we can enter that year here to the right, and then from that year onward, those shares will vest as they, or will exercise as they vest rather. So just to explain that in a bit more detail, let's say that we enter 2025 here as the start year. Any shares that would vest prior to 2025 will not be exercised. So we'll wait to exercise those until we hit 2025. And then from that point on, any shares that vest after 2025 will simply exercise upon vesting from that point on. Similarly, we have another option here for start year and at expiry, which works in essentially the same way, except it will look to the expiration date of those shares instead of the vesting date. So if we use 2025 as the start year again, we won't exercise anything until 2025. So any shares that would expire before that year would expire and be forfeit within the plan, and any shares that expire after 2025 will, exercise in the year of expiry from that point on. This option, in my experience, isn't used quite as frequently as the others, but this would be a bit more use case if you wanted to show a client maybe the impact of losing out on some shares if they waited a bit too long to start exercising those. So it can be useful in some situations. Before moving on from the exercise strategy, I do want to make sure I mention that these exercise options, they are going to mostly pertain to incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options. And when it comes to restricted stock and restricted stock units, those grant types don't expire, and those are going to automatically exercise as they vest as well, regardless of the option that we select here, just based on the way that those grant types work. So, for our Google RSUs here, it doesn't really matter what we select here. But just to keep this accurate, I'm going to select the exercise upon vesting starting now option. All right. Lastly, we are going to be looking at the liquidation strategy options, a bit more straightforward than the exercise strategy options. Starting with liquidate upon exercise, this is simply going to see shares liquidate in the same year that they're exercised within the plan. Liquidate 1 year after exercise is going to delay liquidation by 1 full year. So if you want to make sure that clients receive that long-term capital gains treatment on those sale proceeds, this can be a valuable option. And of course, we do also provide you with an option to have these liquidate in a specific year. So when you choose this last option, you actually do get another option in terms of whether you want those to liquidate all in 1 year or over a specific number of years. So this is probably the most flexible of the options. You can model, a period of time over which we'll liquidate those options, or, we can have those all occur in 1 year. For our clients today, this is actually the option we're going to use here for Alex. As I mentioned, we're treating Alex as a client who maybe isn't quite sure what she should be doing with these stock options. So we're going to say that she's been letting these options accumulate and is planning to liquidate all of these options at retirement. So that year would be 2031, the year she turns 65. So we'll enter that here as our liquidation year, and then we'll leave the liquidation option set to all in 1 year. So we're going to be liquidating those all at once for the current plan here. All right, before we start adding grants here at the bottom, I do want to quickly point out you can choose to make cashless exercise and 83B elections at the stock plan level as well here. These are only going to apply to grant types that are actually eligible for them. So for our RSUs here, neither of these boxes would apply, but you can choose the cashless exercise here for ISOs or NQOs, which will automatically sell a specific number of shares to cover the cost of exercise. And you can also choose 83B here for NQOs and restricted stocks. That's going to see those grants taxed on the grant date rather than when they vest or exercise. Perfect. So once we have all of this dialed in up top here, the last thing to do in terms of data entry would be to enter the individual grants within the stock plan. So we can start adding grants here by clicking Add Grant in the lower right. That's going to add a new grant to our stock plan, and then we can specify the details of each grant, as we add them. So let's enter a grant here, starting with the grant date. We can enter the calendar date here that this, grant was granted, so to speak. So we'll say August 1st, 2020 for this first grant. We'll want to specify the grant type. So we have a couple options here, but we're going to use restricted stock units for the stock plan. We'll then want to specify the number of shares granted at that point in time. So we're going to be treating this first grant as sort of an initial higher grant with a bit higher number of shares granted here. So we'll say 1,000 shares for August 1st, 2020. And then lastly, we'll also want to specify shares held. So this last field here, this is a field that tends to be a common source of confusion, I'd say. So I do want to take an extra minute or two and explain this a bit more in depth. shares held, this is going to apply to grants that have a past grant date, and this would be the specific number of shares that have already vested and exercised, but are being held by the client and have not yet been liquidated. So when it comes to the value of the stock plan that we see reflected here in the net worth, this is going to have a direct impact on that. So maybe let's say maybe Alex is holding all 1,000 of these shares. If we click save here and then save our stock plan, we'll see the full value of those 1,000 shares, that full 193,000 based on the current price that are vested and exercised and waiting to be liquidated within the plan. Let's say maybe the client has already liquidated some of these shares at some point prior to today. So maybe Alex has already liquidated half of this grant and is only holding on to 500 of those original 1,000 shares. If we click save here, we'll see that the dollar value in terms of what we see added to the client's net worth is actually cut in half. So the remaining 500 shares that are not included, that are not being held, we're going to be assuming that those have already been liquidated at some point prior to today, and those will essentially be ignored within the future-looking projections. So, if you have the client's, investment account entered into the plan that those, the value of those stock options ends up in after they're liquidated, once that dollar value hits that account, you can safely remove that number of shares from the shares held field to remove that from the value of the stock plan itself. So something to keep in mind there. The last thing I'll mention in regards to shares held, if you're working with NQOs or ISOs, you will see some additional options here. Firstly, you'll of course need to enter the strike price and the number of months after which that grant would expire, which don't apply to RSUs, but would apply to NQOs and ISOs. But when it comes to shares held, you'll also be asked to specify the number of shares exercised as well. Because these don't automatically exercise upon vesting like RSUs, we first have to tell the system how many of our previously vested shares the client has already exercised. So if we enter 500 shares here, let's say, we're saying essentially that 500 of these initial shares have been vested and exercised, and the other 500 are still unexercised. So there's an additional layer here with NQOs and ISOs specifically, but ultimately it's really just asking you of the original number of shares, how many are unexercised and how many are exercised. And then, of those exercised shares, we can specify how many are still being held versus how many have been liquidated. So, maybe Alex has already liquidated half of these. We can enter 250 here, and it's exactly the same as what we just reviewed for the RSUs here. So just to recap that, because I know this can be a common pain point when entering stock plans, for past grants that are partially or fully vested, shares exercised is how many of those already vested shares that the client has previously exercised, and then our shares held field is how many of those exercised shares that the client is still holding on to and waiting to liquidate. So, the difference between the shares exercised and shares held will assume to have already been liquidated at some point prior and will essentially be omitted from the plan. All right, so I know that was kind of a lot, but that does pretty much cover it for the stock plan data entry process here. There's going to be a lot of overlap between what we just reviewed here in the stock plan data entry and with what we see in the stock plan module. So this will come full circle here in just a few minutes. The last thing I want to point out is that when you're adding individual grants to a stock plan like this, it is possible to customize both the exercise and liquidation strategies for a particular grant as well. So, these liquidation and exercise strategies, I mentioned these are used as the sort of big picture strategies for the stock plan as a whole. But if you need to be really specific with when specific grants will exercise and liquidate within the projections, you can click into the plan strategy menu here, and that's going to allow you to customize that grant strategy. So you can choose for just that specific grant when you want those to exercise, when you want those to liquidate, and that way you can sort of customize things on a grant by grant basis as well. So we do give you the flexibility to get very specific with what's happening here behind the scenes for these stock plans if you need to do that. All right. So just being mindful of the time here, everyone. What I think I'm going to do here is actually re-include the fully built Google RSU plan that I already have fully built out here, just for the sake of time. But I will say once you enter, one stock plan and start entering grants and get comfortable with each of these fields, it is mostly a matter of rinsing and repeating that process until you have all of the grants entered, for that stock plan. And before we switch gears here, I do want to quickly remind everyone that these webinars are recorded. So if you need to rewatch this at any point down the road, you will find a recording of this webinar shortly afterwards in our Help Center. And I will be sure to show you all where you can find that closer to the end of the presentation here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do here, everyone, is take a look at our stock plans module. So once you have your stock plans fully built out here in the net worth section, you can find the stock plans module by clicking into the More menu, represented by the three dots icon here to the right of the profile, and then clicking into the stock plans tab here. And what we see here, we have four different subtabs available within the stock plans module. Just taking a step back here and looking at things sort of big picture, these first two tabs, the summary and grants tabs, are really designed to help you and your clients better understand the current state of their stock plans and of their stock grants. So these are taking a look at, the existing stock plan entries and the grants within those stock plans in the profile section. And then when it comes to the last two tabs, analysis and details, these allow you to model a stock plan proposal and then show the client the value of specific strategies when it comes to exercising and liquidating grants at different times. So we're going to review all four of these tabs today. We are going to start with the summary tab. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water here, folks, and then we can dive in. All right, so starting with our summary tab, this page is going to provide some key visuals and metrics related to the client's existing options and grants. So what we're seeing here is, essentially the dollar value of the client's vested and unvested shares. We can see the total value of all vested and unvested shares, as well as the vested and unvested broken out separately on the right here, which can be valuable to easily identify. And we can also see in this bar chart here, the individual value of the vested and unvested shares broken out by grant type. So we can see our vested RSUs, our unvested RSUs, and then all of those future, unvested NQOs as well. There is an additional chart here that I always like to make sure I highlight. If you click the downward facing arrow next to the name of the chart, you'll find a second option for the share vesting chart. This can be a really helpful visual for helping clients understand, when all of their shares will be fully vested. So we can see a breakdown of our vested and unvested shares projected out over time. So we can see those as they vest over the projections, and then ultimately we can easily identify the year in which all those shares are vested to the far right of the chart here. And for clients that maybe have multiple stock plans, we are looking at all of those stock plans combined as a starting point here, but using the drop down in the upper right, you can zero in on a specific stock plan as well. So that can certainly be valuable for those clients that have more than one stock plan. All right, taking a look here at the grants tab next. This is going to allow us to start taking a more detailed look at all of the individual grants within each stock plan. So something important to keep in mind here is that this table does display grants with a past grant date. So the client's grants as of today. So you'll notice that for the NQOs here, most of these are future, grants that we've entered. So we only see the one grant within this plan that was already granted earlier this year. So future grants won't be reflected in this table. Just something to keep in mind. But that being said, we do have quite a lot of valuable information here. Before diving into some of the key features, I just want to highlight these columns here. This essentially allows you to easily identify vesting and exercise progress for each and every grant within each stock plan. We can see how many shares have been granted, how many of those shares are vested and unexercised, vested and held, and the breakdown of vested and unvested shares here. So lots of really valuable information broken out in a way that's a bit easier to see everything all on one page. Just like The summary tab, you can choose to zero in on a specific stock plan here if you'd like. And then, one of the key features on this table that I always love to highlight is the radio buttons here in the upper right. This allows you to quickly switch back and forth between the number of shares and the dollar value of shares. So, whereas in the profile net worth section, as we're entering that stock plan, we're mostly looking at the number of shares as we're entering all of that information. Of course, the dollar value of shares can be valuable to identify here, and this easily lets you toggle back and forth to see how the number of shares translates to dollar value based on the current price of the stock that we've entered for that stock plan. So, super easy to toggle back and forth here. And I always like to mention, if you need to export any of this information into an Excel spreadsheet, you can easily do so as well by clicking the blue download button here in the upper right. All right, so that takes us to our next few tabs here, starting with the analysis tab. This is where we can start to take a look at the client's stock plan within the broader context of their overall financial plan. And we can start to more directly compare the client's current stock plan strategy as it's entered into the net worth to a new proposed stock plan strategy. And like other modules in RightCapital, we'll be using the action items at the bottom of the page here to create our proposed strategy. So we are going to dial in a proposal in just a second here, but just to quickly review the charts and information that we have access to here. We start off by looking at an invested assets chart, the client's total invested assets each year, so we can track those as they're projected out into the future. We can take a look at the client's projected taxes each year as well, which can certainly be an important talking piece when it comes to, liquidating stock options. We can see a pretty large tax spike here as a result of our client's current strategy. So definitely something we'll be looking at in a second here. There's a chart here that highlights the stock plan percentage of the overall portfolio. So this is a favorite chart of mine. This is a really valuable chart for highlighting exposure. We can see here that as a result of sitting on these options, at its peak, this stock plan represents a third of the client's overall invested assets. So, some of the strategies that we can model here are going to go a long way in helping reduce exposure in that regard as well. And then our last chart here highlights the stock plan cash flows. This is going to highlight both inflows, our sale proceeds, and outflows in the cost of exercise. So we can see, in this case, another spike as a result of liquidating everything all in one year. So we'll be revisiting all of these charts after we dial in a stock plan proposal here. So as I scroll down and take a look at our action items here, some of these fields might look familiar, and that's because these are the exact same inputs that we looked at back in the net worth section of the profile as we were doing that initial data entry. So everything sort of comes full circle here, and if the client maybe isn't making the best decisions when it comes to exercising and liquidating their grants, this is where we can show them some alternatives that can minimize taxes, reduce their equity exposure, and potentially increase their overall invested assets in the long term. So what we see here in the action items is our exercise and liquidation strategies for each of our stock plans, the Google RSUs and the NQOs. And this is what we'll see here as a starting point, but like other action items in RightCapital, you can click the edit button in the lower right and you'll find some additional options as well. So if you want to add something like maybe for the NQOs, a cashless exercise or an 83B election, you can add those items to the action item display. And you can also customize the grant strategy for each stock plan as well. So there's a lot of overlap here with the initial data entry that we looked at in the net worth. So let's start by taking a look at Alex's Google RSUs here. Maybe we want to say to Alex here that perhaps she shouldn't be sitting on all of these grants she's been receiving, and maybe she should be liquidating these. We can adjust our liquidation strategy. Maybe we want to liquidate these all upon exercise. If we click refresh here, we can take a look at the impact of that on Alex's overall plan in terms of invested assets. If we wanted to have these liquidate 1 year after exercise for that long-term capital gains treatment, we can model that as well. And again, we have the flexibility to have these liquidated in a specific year or over a number of years as well. So this can be valuable if Alex is maybe maybe someone who's projected to have cash flow deficits in her pre-retirement years. Maybe her expenses, goals, and taxes outweigh her income, and maybe she could benefit from liquidating these RSUs during that time frame to help cover those outflows. We can prevent her from having to dip into her assets in that way. So to model something like that, we could set our liquidation year to start in maybe 2025, next year, and maybe we'll have those liquidate over a number of years. Let's have this occur from next year through the year of Alex's retirement, so a period of 6 years. If we click refresh here, we can see the impact of that on Alex's plan here. And that strategy actually looks pretty good here in the context of Alex's specific client plan. So even if you're coming into this module without a specific strategy in mind, there's a lot of great information and comparison visuals here that you can leverage to see the impact of different strategies on that particular client's overall plan. So our RSUs seem to be in a good place here. So let's take a look at Alex's NQOs next. And keep in mind here that these are currently unvested. Alex is still expecting some future NQOs to be granted here. So this is a good example of a situation where Alex might benefit from something like an 83B election. Maybe something that Alex isn't aware of is the tax implications potentially of sitting on all of those grants and then exercising those all at once. So if we take a look at our tax chart here, we can see that spike occurring in the year of retirement. But if we model something like an 83B election, that's going to go a long way in mitigating the tax burden that might occur if she were to liquidate all of those NQOs at once. So we can even without making any other changes, we can already see that this is having a significant impact on the plan in terms of the 83B election alone. So again, maybe we don't want Alex to be sitting on these NQOs. Maybe we also want to switch this and have these exercise upon vesting. So let's click a refresh here and take another look through all of our charts to see the impact. We can see in our invested assets chart that as a result of our proposed strategy, Alex is projected to have over $1 million more in ending assets in the long term. We can see that in terms of taxes. Even though we're paying a couple thousand more, cumulative taxes, we've eliminated that massive tax spike that was occurring in the year of Alex's retirement. So a lot of value there. In terms of equity exposure, we can see that at its peak, we've reduced this stock plan's exposure from 33% down to 17. So some value there as well. And then lastly, if we take a look at our stock plan cash flows, we can see that we've spread out the sale proceeds from these options over a number of years, as opposed to one large inflow in the year of retirement. So this is obviously just one example of what you're able to do with these tools here, but depending on the specifics of the client's stock plan and that client's cash flows, you can model, potentially limitless options here in terms of when these options are exercising, liquidating, and some of these additional strategies in terms of cashless exercise, 83B elections, and so on. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in the action items, you can customize each of these strategies on a per grant basis as well, just like back in the profile net worth section. So if we check the custom grant strategy item here in the edit drawer, we'll see an additional option appear here. And just like what we saw before, we can choose to customize exercise, liquidation, 83B elections, cashless exercise for individual grants as well. So just like in the net worth, if you do need to be very specific with exactly what's happening to each and every grant within a client's stock plan, you can choose to customize each individual grant here. You can switch from use plan strategy to custom, and that's going to let you select specific liquidation strategies and liquidation options for individual grants here. All right, so I'm going to turn this off for now because the next thing we're going to do here is integrate this into our retirement projection. So I'm going to click refresh to update this information. Before we integrate this into the retirement analysis, I do want to make sure I touch on the details tab. So that's our final tab available in the stock plans module here. Like other modules in RightCapital, the details tab is where you can find a more detailed cash flow breakdown of everything that's happening within the proposed stock plan strategy. So with our proposal dialed in, we can see the year-by-year mechanics of exactly what's happening as a result of our strategy. So we can see a summary by shares, when all of these grants are, when future grants are being granted over time. We can track those shares as they vest and exercise as we're liquidating those within the plan. And all of that information can also be viewed by dollar value as well within the summary by value cash flow table. And then additionally, we can look at the cash flows here to see things like the cost of exercise, sale proceeds, and net cash flows each year. And then, of course, taxes. We can take a look at the tax impact of, you know, exercising, vesting, liquidating in terms of ordinary income, FICA, short and long-term capital gains. So lots of really granular tax information here as well. And again, just like other tax flow or cash flow tables rather, you can download all of this information as a spreadsheet file. So for those clients who really want to break these numbers down year by year and comb through these tables, you can download this information as a spreadsheet. All right. So with our proposed strategy dialed in here, the last thing we're going to look at before transitioning into the Q&A is integrating this information into the broader context of our client's overall retirement plan. So just like other dedicated planning modules in RightCapital, the stock plans module has the ability to be imported into a proposed plan within the retirement analysis section. So I'm going to start by turning this off just so we can walk through this process from scratch here. But without any changes made to the action items, our current and proposed plans in the retirement analysis will be the same to start off with. And then, within the action items at the bottom of the page here, the strategies column on the right-hand side is where you'll find the stock plan strategy item. So importing all of that data that we've entered into the stock plan module, our new, exercise and liquidation options, our 83B election for the NQOs, we can factor all of that into the client's, bigger picture here by simply switching to the stock plan proposal and then clicking refresh in the lower right. So once this updates, we'll see the impact on the plan as a whole in terms of the probability of success. This client is already sitting at 100% here, but ideally we'd see an increase as a result of our strategy in terms of probability of success. We see an increase in terms of the Monte Carlo simulations median ending invested asset value. So a nice bump from 16 to 17 million here. And then of course, all that information will also flow into the client's retirement cash flows. So we'll be able to see all of those options as they, as the sale proceeds flow into the client's cash flows, here within the summary table of the cash flows area. So in a nutshell, we can use the stock plans module to get a better understanding of the client's current stock plan as they stand today, what the client's current strategy is going to be looking like in the long term in terms of invested assets, taxes, equity exposure, and ultimately, we can fine tune a strategy that best fits the bill for this client and import that into their retirement analysis projections. So that does cover it for the prepared content that I had for you today. So the next thing I'm going to do here is pull up the list of questions that came in during the presentation, and I'm going to answer as many of these as I can today. As I'm pulling up this list of questions on my other screen, I do want to make sure to say that if you have any additional questions about entering stock plans into RightCapital, using the stock plan module to dial in a proposal, you can find a lot of great resources within the RightCapital Help Center. So as a pro tip for you all, you can always find the Help Center by clicking the chat bubble in the lower right corner of a client plan, and then clicking the Search Our Help Center button. So that'll pop into a new tab for you, and you'll be able to take a look at any of our Help Center resources. So when it comes to stock plans, we have resources dedicated to data entry. So if you want to review any of the information we looked over in the profile net worth section, you can find all of that here. We have an overview of our stock plans module, both in written form as well as in training video form. So you can review all of the different tabs in the stock plans module in that way. And of course, we have frequently asked questions. We have knowledge base articles detailing the differences between each grant type, how that information is treated tax-wise at grant, vest, exercise, liquidation. There's lots of really valuable information here. So I always like to highlight all of our stock plan resources within the Help Center here.